Okay, mic check. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Zoo, here we go again. Everybody, everybody, got a lot to say, got a lot to say. Everybody, got a lot to say, got a lot to say.
My microphone is on.
Hey, welcome to the Adult Conversations podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for tuning in to the Adult Conversations channel, where we discuss topics of adult content. Of course, this is your host, Janae, and I have a very special guest today, Miss Jane Elliott. If you are unaware of who Jane Elliott is, she is an anti-racism activist and educator who is known for the blue eyes, brown eyes exercise that she first completed in 1968. And if you're not aware of this exercise, I will post some links to the different videos that she completed with this exercise with college students and other adults. Also, she has appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, has attended and spoke at different conferences with Roland Martin, has appeared on the Breakfast Club radio show, has done a conference at the University of Houston where she sat next to and spoke with Angela Davis. I could go on and on. I am ecstatic and beyond overjoyed to have her be a guest on this podcast. And I thank you, Ms. Elliott, for being able to speak with me at this time.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome.
Thank you. So before getting into some questions, could you explain what led you into becoming an anti-racism activist and also doing the work that you have been doing in order to educate others about this country's problem with racism?
Well, what led me to become an activist is the fact that I'm an educator. And the word educator comes from the root duc, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And the number one ignorance in this country is racism. Only people who are totally ignorant and have decided to stay that way still believe in the myth of 3 or 4 different races. There's only one. I knew that from an early age because my father said you can't judge a book by its cover. And he also said you don't have the right to judge a man until you've walked in his footsteps. Now, none of us, of those who call ourselves white, which is a lie in the first place, have walked in the shoes of a person of color. I know that there's all kinds of discrimination in this country, but the way we treat other people, the model we use for how we treat those others who are different is racism. How we treat Black people is the model for how we treat all those others that against whom we want to discriminate. Make no mistake about that. Martin Luther King Jr. had one of our, I was teaching 3rd grade, Martin Luther King Jr. had been one of our heroes of the month in February, along with, unfortunately, George Washington, who owned slaves, Abraham Lincoln, who refused to free the slaves until he absolutely had to, Daniel Boone, who came to this continent and killed off the Native Americans and took their land, and Davy Crockett, who was killed as he tried to help take over Mexicans' land from Mexico. So those are our heroes of the month in February, along with a man who wanted to make things better for all of us. He wasn't about killing, he wasn't about destroying, he wasn't about taking over. He was simply about making life better for everyone. He had been one of our heroes and killed on April 4th. And I didn't know what to do about that. When I found out that had happened, I'd come home from school. My sister told me to turn on the television, so I did. And there was the news that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. I didn't know what to do, so I decided that I would do what Hitler did. I decided that I would split my group of students the next day according to a physical characteristic over which they had absolutely no control. I would treat those who had the right physical characteristics as we treat white people in this country, and I would treat those who had the wrong physical characteristic the way we treat people of color, particularly Black people in this country. I didn't know how this would work. If I had known how it would work, I wouldn't have done it because I wouldn't have suffered through the nonsense that happened as a result of my doing that exercise. But I learned a lot. My kids learned a little. I learned a lot.
And then I could see from different videos that I've watched of you doing this exercise, a lot of people couldn't handle it. And it was not like you were sugarcoating anything or beating around the bush. You were cutthroat, dry with it. And I could tell that there were a lot of people who couldn't even just handle the exercise that you completed with them for like, an hour or two? So I definitely understand.
what is absolutely astounding about that is when I did that exercise with little third graders for one day, they knew it was an exercise. They knew it was going to end at the end of the day. They knew that there was only one person running it. It was me. They weren't going to be treated badly outside my classroom, only inside my classroom. And they knew it was for a day. When I do this with adults, white adults, they also know that it's only for an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours. And yet their reactions are so absolutely extreme and so explosive and so childlike that I can't believe that they're really doing, and yet I know they are. I know what they're doing. I know what they're feeling. They lose power for a day, for an hour and a half, and that loss of power in front of people that they consider powerless, except during the exercise, those who are supposedly powerless have the power during the exercise. And that makes white males, especially white males, extremely angry. This is not something they're accustomed to. This is not something they think they need to know about. I maintain that we all need to know about how it feels to go through this on a lifetime basis, because if you have to go through it for an hour and a half and you can't stand it, then I want to know how we expect people of color to go through it for a lifetime and not to be upset by it.
Exactly. Which is a good segue to my next question. Can you speak about your thoughts on how racism, slavery, and forms of white superiority has played a significant role on the mental health and mentality of African Americans?
Now say that again.
Can you speak about your thoughts on how racism, slavery, and forms of white superiority has played a significant role on the mental health and mentality of African Americans?
Well, of course it has. During the exercise, the first time I did the exercise, I had 4 dyslexic, brown-eyed dyslexic boys in my classroom. Dyslexic people don't hear words the way they're said, don't see words the way they're written, are very poor readers, poor spellers, and poor writers. On the day those 4 dyslexic boys were on the top in that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. And at the end of the day, brown-eyed Billy came up to my classroom, up to my desk and said, "Mrs. Elliott, where's my spelling paper?" I said, "What do you want it for, Billy?" He said, "I want to take it home and show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell, and I can." He didn't find out until April 5th of his 3rd grade year that he could spell, because he had been living down to his previous teacher's expectations of him. And I based my expectations of him on the kinds of things that his previous teacher said about him and his brother and his father in the teacher's lounge in the elementary school school building. If you base your expectations of people low enough, they will live down to your expectations of them, unless they know that you're lying. Now, a whole lot of young black males and females are succeeding today because they found out the lie. They know that having more or less melanin in your skin does not change your intelligence nor your worth as a human being. We have lied about this long enough. But you see, the reason we lie about it is because it was what we were taught. Your mother, your father, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-great-great-grandmother, up back 300,000 to 500,000 years ago, they knew the difference. But for the last 500 years, we have been teaching the lie. And make no mistake about this, the idea of 3 or 4 different races is a lie. It was deliberately constructed during the Spanish Inquisition to keep one group of people on top and everybody else on the bottom. And it all came about because Torquemada and the people who ran the Spanish Inquisition were trying to turn people into Catholics. But they found out after they'd killed a bunch of people that they'd killed a bunch of Christians. So they realized you couldn't tell what a person's religion was by looking at them. So they had to find a way to define those who were fit to die easily, quickly. And they set upon skin color. Now that's how long this idiocy has been going on. This has only been between 500 and 600 years of this. This is not a myth. We call it a myth. We call it the myth of race. We call it a myth, but we're wrong. A myth is something that you make up to explain some natural phenomena that you can't understand. So you make up a myth. Like the Greeks invented the myth that the sun is a golden chariot that carries a god across the sky every morning. They believed that for thousands of years. Now, we've only had this myth of numbers of different races for between 500 and 600 years. It's time to give it up. A lie is something that you create to justify something ugly that you're doing. And that's exactly what they did during the Spanish Inquisition. They made up the lie of several different races in order to justify what they were doing, which was killing people in order to Christianize them. This is a really bad way to Christianize people. It's hard to worship God after you're dead. But you see, it didn't occur to them, I think, that people would really take this on and believe it forever. So it's time for us to stop believing it. We have believed this and lived this long enough now. It has destroyed people. Millions, literally millions of people have been destroyed by the lie of race. It's time to get over it.
Yes, which was another question of mine. So I am a fan of Minister Farrakhan, and one of his videos that he completed was on the Donahue show, and he talked about how scholars and the scientists Gregor Mendel and also Louis Leakey had talked about the origin of African Americans, the origin of civilization, and things like that. And something that he talked about was how black skin and dark eyes are of the dominant, and white skin and light eyes are of the recessive. Like, you can get the recessive from the dominant, but you can't get the dominant from the recessive. Why do you think that this is not being taught within our schools? And then how can we get information like this in our schools so that we are educating everyone?
Well, number one, I appreciate you appreciating Dr. Farrakhan. However, you need to read the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. Everybody needs to read that book. Robert Wald, W-A-L-D, Sussman, S-U-S-S-M-A-N. Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, Wald, W-A-L-D, Sussman, S-U-S-S-M-A-N. And he describes how this whole thing got started, how it is perpetuated, and why it is perpetuated, and what we can do about it. We need to put a stop to it. I'm not talking about the religion of this thing. I'm talking about the fact that this is 2020, right?
Yes.
2020. We are still using the language and the philosophy and the politics that we heard about in the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, if people are going to live the way they lived in the 16th and 17th centuries, I suggest that they give up all the things that we have now that they didn't have then. If you're going to hold on to something as ignorant as racism, then you're going to have to give up electricity. You're going to have to give up running water. You're going to have to give up bathrooms, showers. You're going to have to give up automobiles and tractors and all these pharmaceuticals. You're going to have to give up all the things that make your life comfortable. And all you women are going to start wearing pantaloons and pantalettes. And you men are going to start wearing knee breeches and shoes with silver buckles on them. Now, if you want to think the way we thought in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, go ahead, but live that way. See how comfortable you will be. You will be extremely uncomfortable. And because of our ignorance about race and because of our absolute determination to maintain that ridiculous idea, we have made a whole lot of people very uncomfortable for the last 400 years in this country. We've put Native Americans on reservations. We brought people we went to Hull, England, and bought people from the slave traders there and brought them back to this country to serve as slaves. It is a big moneymaker. You need to know that racism is a big moneymaker. We thought that we had done away with slavery. However, if you have read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, you know that we haven't done away with slavery in this country. When Bill Clinton was president, he put together this 3 strikes you're out thing, which meant that thousands of young black males went to prison because of something they had done, the third little thing or big thing or whatever it was that they had done. They are still there. They will be in prison until somebody says this was done unconstitutionally, this was done unfairly, this has to be stopped and it has to be fixed. However, we are insisting on those young black males staying in prison. But about a month ago, our so-called president released from prison 3 men who had pled guilty to crimes against this country. You need to realize that he let them out because they were going to be exposed to COVID-19 in prison. He couldn't let that happen. Now this week, he has commuted the sentence of another one of his cronies. This is totally unfair, totally ridiculous, and every thinking human being in this country is seeing it happen and realizing that what we're talking about here is the power of one melanin challenged male to behave in ways that are absolutely unconstitutional. And I want to know why people are supporting that. And I want to know why members of the House of Representatives and the Senate are supporting that. You need to realize that what we do today constructs what happens tomorrow.
Exactly.
And if this is the way a president can behave today, then who knows what a president can do in the future. So with that thought in mind, this is not a political situation here. This is a survival of the citizenry in this country. If we are going to survive as citizens in this country, we have to fix this system. Somebody has rigged it. It is broken. The rest of us have to pick it up and put it back together. And you cannot put it back together as long as you are holding 10 to 20% of a group of people in prison and enslaving them and calling it freedom, liberty, and justice for all.
Exactly.
Either provide liberty and justice for all or stop talking about it.
Exactly.
What was the question? I'm sorry. If you ask me a question, you'll get 52 answers. Sorry about that.
No, I'm going to keep letting you go. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. No, so my question was, why are we not educating everyone in our schools in regards to early civilization, origin of African Americans? Because I know a lot of our ignorance starts where we just think that African Americans, they were slaves and that was it. But it's so much more to our origin before slavery. So why do you think that is not being taught in our schools?
Because you're forgetting something extremely important here. You're forgetting that our educators were educated by people who were educated in the same way that we're being educated.
Right.
You need to realize that if you haven't read the book, The Color of Law, by Richard Rothstein. Yes, Richard Rothstein. If you haven't read the book, The Color of Law, here it is. Get this book and read it.
Okay.
And you'll find out that in fact, most of the segregation in this country that people want to call de facto, which means people wanted to be segregated this way, in fact, de jure segregation. It has been put in place by people who write laws, and those people who wrote those laws and who are enforcing those laws learned the same things that you and I did. Mm-hmm. We learned the lie of race. And so if you have been taught from the moment you're born to believe in the lie of race, that's what you will learn. And that is the kind of law you will write that supports what you learned as a child. And our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, our great-great-grandfathers, this goes back 500 years. We've had 500 years of being conditioned to the lie of race. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't go to 500 years to get over it. Make no mistake about this. Racism is a learned response. To be a racist, you have to be taught to be a racist. Anything you learn, you can unlearn. It's time to unlearn our racism. And the first thing you have to do if you're going to do that is decide not to believe the lie of race. There's only one race. We are all members of the same race. It's the human race. And if you think we're different races, think about it this way. You can't cross a cat with a dog and get a dad or a dog because they are two different species. You can't do it. Exactly. But we cross people of different color groups every day and get beautiful, intelligent, creative, productive human beings. Therefore, these colors do not indicate different species. We are all members of the same species. Now, I don't care how far back you go in history and say, well, the Neanderthals, well, Peking, well, man. The truth of the matter is we all came from those first modern human beings who evolved in sub-Saharan Africa between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago. And within a few thousand years, a number of thousands of years, after their DNA appeared on the earth, all of Java man, all of Peking man, and most of Neanderthal man's DNA had disappeared from the face of the earth because that species is stronger than all the others that had evolved at that point. And we are still evolving. Eventually we'll get smart. We haven't gotten smart yet, but working on it.
Exactly. So my next question is, And I did a segment about this, about the murals and the paintings of Black Lives Matters that we are seeing after George Floyd's death. Me personally, I feel like that is definitely not enough in regards to the change we really need to see within this country. What are your thoughts about the murals and the paintings that are being done, and also about the knocking down of the different statues that represented this country's sins, basically?
Okay, you can knock down a statue. You can knock down every statue on the face of the earth. Then what are you going to do? All right, we got rid of the statues. Did we get rid of the attitude? Did we get rid of the behaviors? Did we get rid of the myth? Did we get rid of the lies? Did we get rid of the treatment, the bad treatment? Did it accomplish anything other than making pale faces even angrier? I'm not sure it does, but it may be a start. But until we have changed this situation so that no child, when being born, is treated badly because of the doctor's opinion of skin color, until we get that taken care of, knocking down statues isn't going to do it. Now we'll see. After we get the statues knocked down, what are we going to do next? Now I'll make a suggestion to Black Lives Matter people, and they're going to like this. And you're going to say, you don't have the right to tell Black people what to do. I'm not telling Black people what to do. I'm trying to educate Black people. I'm telling you that I know white folks. I know them really, really well. And when white folks hear that statement, Black Lives Matter, they have very selective hearing. And they think they hear only Black Lives Matter.
Right, exactly.
And and they react immediately to, well, what about the rest of us?
Right.
You see, there's a solution for that. The white people pale faces have weaponized the Black Lives Matter statement. You need to, if you want not to allow pale faces to weaponize that statement, all you have to do is add a comma after matter and put the word to, T-O-O. Black Lives Matter too. Then they can't say, well, you're just talking about Black Lives Matter. Then they'll have to admit that, oh, you mean in addition to all the rest of us, don't you? Yeah, fool. Get this into your head. Black Lives Matter too. But you also ought to know, white folks, that every one of you, if you trace your DNA back far enough, would find a percentage of your DNA came from a country in Africa. Every human being on the face of the earth would find out that Black Lives Matter, all right, because we are all descendants of those first Black modern human beings. So if you want to shut them up, use something that'll shut them up. But as long as you use just Black Lives Matter, they will hear only Black Lives Matter, and that's how they react to that. If you put a to after it, all they can do is say, well, I guess I misunderstood. And you can say, once again, you've been misunderstanding for the last 500 years. We're trying to bring you into the 21st century, folks. Let's get into the 21st century now, and we'll give you back all the things that Black males have made available for you. We'll give you back that stoplight, that red, green, and yellow stoplight. We'll give that back to you, but you have to give it up as long as you think that Black lives don't amount to anything. You have to give that up. You'll also have to give up things like, the cure for lots and lots of diseases. You'll also have to give up blood transfusions using stored plasma. You'll have to give up things like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You'll have to give up law. You'll have to give up everything that came out of Egypt. You can give all those things up as long as you believe that only people of the melanin challenged group have the right to live, to love, and to reproduce. Now, right now in this country, we have a president who has said openly, and still wasn't impeached. He has said openly, we can't have those brown-skinned people come into this country because they reproduce too rapidly. So we're going to build a wall along the southern border of this country to keep out brown-skinned people. Now, if that isn't an example of blatant racism, I don't know what is. And I don't know why people in the Congress are agreeing to go along with this. But I know why they will continue to, because that person has appointed a whole lot of members to the court system in this country. And that means that for the long pull, and those are lifetime appointments, for the long pull, we're going to be dealing with the damage that has been done to this country by a blatantly racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric boy grown tall in the White House. So we could fix this. We could fix this in November. We could begin the fixing. but we better be very careful and be damn sure that we fix it. Because if we don't, our country is on the way to losing its democracy.
Yes, yes. And I definitely like the fact that you said to add the two to it, because I know I found myself in a lot of arguments about the Black Lives Matter slogan, basically. And I'm like, why do you guys not understand this? Or why do some of you not understand it? So it makes sense to add the two so that others can comprehend it in that manner. So I'm so glad that you said that. And then also within it, that I had seen,
the point is, you have to de-weaponize that statement. That's a perfectly logical statement, that Black Lives Matter. But you are not dealing with logical people.
Right.
You're dealing with frightened, melanin-challenged people who are fully aware that within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. That's a fact. Within 30 years, demographics tell us that white people will be a numerical minority instead of the majority in the United States of America. You need to realize that as long as you can use that, as long as you they can weaponize that statement, that's what they'll do. I'm one of those people. I know how we behave. I know how scared we are, because I know that when I do a program, and the night I did the program with Angela Davis, some young woman, even not young, some white woman in the audience said, well, don't those Black people want to get even with the rest of us? Aren't they going to try to get even if they get on top? And I said, well, let's find out. And half of that 1,500 audience was Black. I said, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the Black race and who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. 3 young Black males stood. The rest of them just turned and looked at him like, well, are you crazy? And I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us. Does that make you feel better? And she's going, well, yeah. I said, now, let's be honest about this. They don't want to get even with all of us. But will every Black person in this room who'd like to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand? The whole bunch jumped up, cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another and just absolutely delighted. Yeah, I know 1 or 2 I want to get even with. And I started to laugh and I said, they don't want to get even with all of us. They just want, each of them just wants to get even with 1 or 2. Now, all you have to do if you want to be comfortable in the future is behave in such a way that you aren't one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. That makes sense. I said, yeah, that makes sense to me. Just be sure you aren't one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. It has nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with behavior. I don't think Black people want to get even with all of us. I think they want to get equity, which they are promised. I think they want, you and I will never be equal. We will never enjoy equality. You'll always be younger than I am. You'll always be thinner than I am. You'll always be smarter than I am. You'll always be more creative than I am. We will never be equal. However, we are guaranteed equal treatment under the law.
Yes.
And that is what we have to determine that we are going to demand, and that we are going to demand for all people, which means we'll start, if we're going to give reparations. Now, this is going to set your teeth on edge, but you'll get used to it because I'm not a nice person. If we're going to do reparations, first, we'll give the land back to the Indians.
Yes.
Okay, let's give reparations to the people whose land we stole. Now somebody's going to say, we paid them for this land in beads and trinkets.
Right, right.
Killed their children, raped their wives, stole their land. Now, if we're going to do reparations, let's do reparations starting with Native Americans. Let's have Black folks demand reparations for them, and then demand reparations for people of other color groups, particularly Blacks. Absolutely, absolutely. We enslaved Native Americans before we enslaved Blacks. And we are enslaving people of all colors in the prison system today. But since a large majority of our people in prison, these prisons, are Black, they are bearing the brunt of slavery in this country. We need to put a stop to that kind of business. However, if you haven't read Robert Reich's book, The System, Who Rigged It and How to Fix It, you better get it and read it, because you don't understand what's going on until you read what he wrote. And then all of a sudden you'll think, oh my God, here is a pale-faced man who knows the truth, and he dares to write it down. And he dares to get it, and he got it published. You need to read Robert Reich's The System. Who Rigged It?
Robert Reich's The System. Okay. Robert Reich's The System. I just wrote it down. Okay. Perfect. Yes, yes. So my last question is, I know I watched a snippet of you on a previous interview, and you stated the following: we don't need a colorblind society. We need a society that is no longer color or blinded by color. How do you believe that we can achieve this, and what should we begin doing in order to achieve this?
Well, if I were teaching at the kindergarten level this year, I would insist that every child have a box of crayons. Mm-hmm. And I would say, boys and girls, we're going to learn the colors for sure. Right now, we're going to start with the first one. Take out your white crayon. And I've had them hold up that white crayon. Now I'd say, now put that against the back of your hand and see if it matches your skin. There won't be a child in that room who will say, matches mine, because it doesn't. Mm-hmm. You look at my shirt and you look at my skin, and can you see where my shirt stops and my skin begins?
Yes.
What color is my shirt?
White.
White. Then what color is my skin?
It's not the same color as your shirt.
It ain't the same color as my shirt, and it isn't the same color as your shirt. And what color is my hair? White. It isn't the same color as my hair, as my skin. These kids need to realize that every child in that classroom has skin that is a shade of brown, because we all have the same ancestors back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. Every child in that room is one of the brown members of society. Every person on the face of the earth is. So for anybody to say, well, I'm white because my dad said so, that teacher needs to say, don't argue with your father until you get old enough. When you are out on your own and you're making your own way, then you can argue with your father. But until then, just realize that your father learned things that you are going to learn, things that your father never learned. I learned things that my father never learned. You learned things that your father never learned. These kids are going to learn things that their fathers are never going to learn. And the first thing they're going to learn is there's only one race on the face of the earth. We're all members of the human race, Homo sapien, all members of the same race, and we all are shades of brown. And if your principal has trouble with that, then you get the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018 and get this part of it out and hang it on the wall. See that? About 70 different people with different skin colors. And under each one of them is a number, because these are the numbers on the Pantone color wheel. You can find your skin color on the Pantone color wheel.
Okay.
Get this and hang it on the wall and say, boys and girls, go up to the wall, put your hand against the wall and see which of these colors matches you, because every one of you can find your color on the color wheel. Now, you will notice that there are no people of this color on the color wheel, because people do not come in this color. We come in shades of brown. We have to teach children that all human beings come in shades of brown. And if you don't believe that, then you have to remember that just this morning, the people who had Washington, is it the Indians, are no longer the Indians. Mm-hmm. That football team has now changed its name, Redskins. They're no longer the Redskins. They changed their name from the Redskins. They don't know what they're going to change it to. I'll bet they won't change it to the Eskimos. I'll bet they won't change it to the Snowballs. I'll bet they won't change it to the Snowballs. What do you bet? Maybe they'll change it to the Pantones. I don't know. But they've removed the name Redskin from the list. And that is absolutely about time. Mm-hmm. That should have been done a long, long time ago, because the idea of Native Americans being Redskins is another thing that was made up. The first palefaces who came here, and the Native Americans called us palefaces. The first palefaces who came here weren't aware that Native Americans painted their skin red for certain occasions. So they just thought they were all red. So they called them Redskins. And so we have called them Redskins ever since. It was a lie. It's a lie like the number of different races. Those Native Americans came to this continent from Africa, just like all the rest of us did. So they got here a long time before palefaces did. You need to realize that those brilliant Black people, those first modern human beings, managed to populate every landmass on the face of the earth over several thousands of years. So that when you see a person who looks fairly white, you have to say, well, that person is probably from one of the northern climes, probably from Norway or Sweden or Denmark, where they don't get much sunlight, so their bodies don't produce much melanin. You have to realize that this skin color is a reaction, your body's response to the natural environment. It has nothing to do with being God's chosen children. And I will never forget the woman who said to me, I don't dislike black people. When I see one, I just think, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And I said, you know what you just said? She said, well, wait a minute. What you said, here's what I heard you say. You think that God woke up one morning, decided to make something beautiful, and she made you. She said, that's not what I mean. I said, let me tell you something. Doesn't mean what you meant by what you say isn't important. How it is perceived is what is important. I perceive the statements you just made as blatantly, ignorantly racist. Well, I'm not a racist. Some of my best friends, I said, stop right there. Don't tell me that some of your best friends are black. And do not tell me. No, don't do that to me, and don't do that to you, because you are nailing down my idea of you as a racist. So now I'm gonna buy a sweatshirt on which it says, know when to shut up. Yes. Now, I'm not going to pay attention to that, but I'm going to let my people who are talking to me pay attention to that, because when you're about to say something racist, shut up if you aren't sure it isn't a racist statement. Now, people who listen to this or who see this are going to say, how will I know? Well, there's a way to find out. A woman named Judith Katz wrote a book called, I don't remember the name of the book, don't worry about it. And she wrote a book in which White Awareness. Judith Katz, K-A-T-Z, wrote the book White Awareness. And in that book, she has a list of top typical statements that white folks make that think they aren't racist. Like, when I see you, I don't see you black. Has anyone ever said that to you?
Of course. Of course.
Of course they have. Of course. And what did you respond to them?
Well, what are you looking at? Because I am. Right.
Well, yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, but she expects you to be grateful. No, you don't have to be grateful for her admitting that she has to ignore the largest inch-by-inch organ on your body, which is your skin, in order to relate positively to you. Now, she has a problem. Skin color isn't the problem. If you don't remember anything else about today, you remember this. Skin color is not the problem. Ignorance is the problem.